everybody. You are listening to the Northern Miner Podcast, and I'm your host, Matthew Keeble. And we have another action-packed episode for you, fresh off our 1-year anniversary, so this is episode 53. Lesley will be swinging by with the latest edition of the Geology Corner. This one is going to be sort of a pan-Canadian geological journey for us. Lesley just finished her countrywide summary of Canadian geology, where she looked at the different provinces, geological provinces, some of the exploration activity that's going on across the country, and also talked to the provincial geological surveys about what sort of new understandings and ideas are coming around in academic geology as well. So what we're going to do is Lesley's going to come in and we're going to have a chat on sort of what she's excited about, what she's learned, and sort of what exploration place stood out to her as she did her cross-Canada journey on the country's geology. So, and as we mentioned, we'll mention it during the segment as well, but all this information is going to be going into a really cool magazine on Canadian geology that I know for sure will be running at our Canadian Mining Symposium May 9th in London, England. Whether you can get that beforehand, I'm not too sure, but we are going to check in on that for you. On top of that, I had a chance to sit down with Trevali Mining President and CEO, Dr. Mark Cruz, last week. And anyone who's tied into the industry, and probably some who aren't, will have caught the rather massive deal that Trevali cut with Glencore in terms of picking up 2 new mines in Africa for around $400 million in total all cash and share consideration. So we'll sit down with Dr. Cruz. We'll talk a little bit about the synthesis and development of that relationship with Glencore and how it sort of culminated in this transaction. We'll talk a little bit about working in Africa, the 2 new mines they're acquiring in Namibia and Burkina Faso. So it'll be interesting, and we'll run about 5 minutes worth of comments from Dr. Cruz on the transaction, etc., which is going to be great. And there is a longer form article I just put out on the website with my conversation with Dr. Cruz and Trevali. So do check that out at northernminer.com. As always, please do consider subscribing, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out on YouTube, and please do rate this podcast on iTunes because that helps us out immensely. But before we do crack in with our segments this week, I'm going to dig into a little bit of macro. There's a few things we should talk about. Firstly, we should talk a little bit about, surprise, Donald Trump. So I guess it's been a couple weeks since we had to talk about him. But global equity markets are struggling to start the week. People who were tied into the newswire on Friday will have caught that Trump could not implement his GOP healthcare bill. There was a little bit of a brouhaha. It had to be withdrawn on Friday. So that has sort of called into question Donald Trump's ability to implement his economic agenda. The spot gold price briefly hit a 1-month high this morning at around $1,257 per ounce. And analysts speculate that the overnight and early morning rally today on Monday can be directly linked to the failure of U.S. President Trump to push through the healthcare reform. The U.S. dollar subsequently slipped against the yen and the euro as the market quote-unquote recalibrates its growth inflation expectations noticeably for the United States. Meanwhile, the base metal complex was down about 2% this morning following negative sentiment in ferrous futures trading out of China. Steel prices are at late November 2016 levels, giving up most of the Trump reflation trade move, while a failure to push through the new healthcare bill by the Trump administration, again on Friday, has led to concern over its ability to cut taxes and spend big on infrastructure. Supply concerns are easing for copper as workers at BHP's East Escondida mine in Chile are set to get back to work. Meanwhile, Freeport McMoran said that a nearly 2-week strike at its Cerro Verde mine in Peru has quote-unquote not materially impacted production levels. Additionally, seaborne met coal producers will have their eyes on Cyclone Debbie. This is a tropical cyclone that is forecast to be a Category 4 storm as it crosses Australia's Queensland coast tomorrow. Could have gusts of wind up to 280 kilometers per hour. Rail lines and loading operations at ports have reportedly already been affected, and should the cyclone move further south, the impact could be quite severe, according to analysts. Chinese steel mills are apparently not yet worried, given the ample stocks they have on hand right now, but we will keep our eye on Cyclone Debbie in terms of its potential effect effect on the seaborne coal market, which could affect Canadian major tech resources, which does have significant exposure to coal. So that pretty much wraps up our macro for the week. What we'll do now is we'll crack right in with Lesley's Geology Corner, wherein we explore the geological provinces of Canada and have a good chat just generally about some of the exploration plays that are going on in the country, and sort of wrap up what Lesley's learned over her rather lengthy journey through the geological surveys and data mills, as she sort of puts together a map of what's going on in Canada geologically and how understanding has been changing, what some of the exciting exploration plays are, etc. So I will run that, and I will see you after the break to introduce an interview with Trevali Mining CEO, Dr. Mark Cruz.
Here we are.
We're back. Actually in studio this week. Not
listening to those tunes.
Yeah, there was definitely tunes.
I my iPod.
Yeah. We could have had some sort of background music. I could put it in after the fact. No, those on-site ones are always fun because you don't know what quite is going on in the background. And somebody always seems to drop something. Like, it's like they wait till I have the recorder on to drop like 18 glasses. I notice that like every time. I'm like, I don't normally notice that in a restaurant or a pub. I guess it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But then you go back and listen to it and I'm like, who the heck is like juggling silverware in the background? Like, what are they doing? And so I'm like, every time
it could just be me playing with my ring or something. It
was definitely like plates. And I was like, what the heck is going on back there? That was like the time we did it in Dawson at the conference in the Yukon.
Yeah.
And they were like deconstructing the tent behind us.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was
that was terrible.
It's post-production nightmares all over the place. Yeah. But that's what, if you're a sound engineer, where you record and how you set up your recording is even more important than post-production, I have learned.
Yeah.
Through this process. So anyways, enough about my my whining, I guess. But we are back for the Geology Corner.
Yeah, and I guess this week I'm going to be dropping heaps of rocks.
Dropping the hammer.
Dropping heaps of hammers on Canadian geology.
Yes, because you just completed your sort of mega article, right?
Yeah, so I just did this brief look at Canada's geology and metal districts, and I did it in 1,600 words. And I got an email back from one of the GSC guys, and he's like, congratulations on summarizing the geology of Canada and metal districts in 1,600 words. And I felt really proud of myself. I'm like, yes.
Yeah,
and I did. So
was there a lot of pictures?
No.
Oh wow, that's even more impressive.
There's no pictures in there.
Yeah.
1,600 words, just text.
Because sometimes in those cases, diagrams can say more than.
I know. There will be figures with it.
Because you're working on the maps.
But you see, when we're talking about Earth's history, especially going back beyond 4 billion years, it's going to require imagination.
Yep.
There's that picture of Star Trek with Next Gen, Star Trek Next Gen with Jean-Luc Picard and Q, and they're standing in the Archean. I've got that photo.
Oh, nice.
But everything else, it needs to be kind of up to the reader.
And are you doing? You mentioned you're doing something with geological software, or is there?
Yeah, I'm just using some ArcGIS to kind of map things out.
So that'll be pretty cool. Is that its own magazine, or is it part of?
That's going to be its own magazine.
Nice.
But then I'll still funnel it into the paper for the pleasure of many.
Cool. So everybody keep your eyes open for that, because it's I don't know when that stuff's due out, actually, to be completely honest. Next month, I think.
Yeah.
Probably. Well, I know it's going to our Canadian Mining Symposium in London on May 9th. But I don't know if it's going to have a run before that. So I'll have to ask our editor-in-chief, John Cumming.
You never know these things.
Yeah, to see what sort of dates we have on that for everybody.
But the cool thing that I've learned about all of it is, like, now that I've really seen from a bird's eye view at a 1 to 500,000 scale of geology of Canada is, all these major metal deposits.
Yeah.
They clearly don't, just materialize out of thin air. They've all been developed because of some major tectonic event that had occurred over the course of Canada's 4 billion plus year history.
Now you're talking about the major base metal camps in the East Coast, and then Hemlo or Voisey's Bay.
Yeah, you name it. It's all of it. There's a reason for it being there. Yeah. And I thought that was really cool. So, I guess today it's like if we went to go find like a porphyry copper deposit or a VMS deposit today, you'd clearly go to like, you know, South America where you have like subduction underneath the plate, or you go out to like PNG where Nautilus is exploring for Solara 1, trying to dig up this VMS deposit that's forming at the bottom of the sea floor. And I mean, it's pretty easy to figure it out where you'd go hunting for these things today. But where do you go hunting for the volcanic arcs that are, you know, 200 million years old or 4 billion years old? Like, where do you go for that? And I clearly learned that it's here in Canada.
It's in Canada.
We have so much of it. And you just got to be really super clever to figure it out, because the one thing I noticed is that, like I said, major tectonic events, a lot of these deposits in Canada, you see that they form along like the major cratonic boundaries.
And we talked with Craig last week about that.
Yeah. And they form within suture zones of the terrains, the individual terrains that make up those cratons. So if you want to find a big deposit, you got to know your craton map. You got to know where those boundaries are, because they're following along that sort of pattern. They're not just, like I said, coming out of thin air. They're following a feature that was created by something massive that happened in the past, and regionally trending too. So it's not just confined to one small area. You could be looking at potential for this for like kilometers upon kilometers across Canada.
And obviously we've seen a lot of recent exploration stories around brownfield or old sites. We're seeing a lot of activity around Quebec now in terms of people trying to revitalize old camps, and you're seeing it even in BC with companies like IDM Mining that are looking at Red Mountain and stuff. But you're saying more so in terms of new discoveries.
Well, new discoveries for sure, but brownfield, the other thing that I learned about brownfield when I was doing all this sort of stuff is just how, okay, so everything that we have in the interior, right? Like pretty much all of Canada has been like multiple massive Himalayan scale mountain chains, and they've all just been like eroded down to the core, so it's all flat. So you have a geologist and they're walking on the ground, and they look like they're walking on flat ground, but in reality, they're actually walking and scaling massive mountain ranges, right? Just by walking.
Yeah.
And so you could walk 200 meters from your major deposit and find yourself in a totally different erosional level, right? So, for example, if you're in a greenstone belt and you've got your orogenic gold deposit there sitting pretty in these green-colored rocks that have been weakly metamorphosed, in those projects, it's actually really easy to walk like 200 meters and find yourself in upper granulite facies.
And what would be an example of a
that would be James Bay.
James Bay.
James Bay is a perfect example. Like the further north you go in James Bay, suddenly you're getting out of green schist real fast, and you're going straight into super high temperatures where no orogenic gold would survive.
Yeah.
So brownfield is one thing. Just because you have a massive package of rocks doesn't necessarily mean that it's all going to be explorable, because you have to look at the erosional level, right, of that ancient mountain chain that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Maybe you're too high, maybe you're too low. You got to look at metamorphism is another really big thing for any sort of deposit, VMS or gold or whatever. And so like I really kind of learned and appreciated that. So when people say we have 1,000 square kilometer package in this really prospective thing, then that's cool, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what's the metamorphic grade, right? What are you guys looking at there? What's the impact there? How much of that land is actually prospective? Because things change like that in Archean, man. Those rocks have just been banged up for like friggin' 3 billion years. It's crazy.
Interestingly, we talked a bit about that's sort of what Osisko Mining is doing with Windfall, is bringing a new exploration idea to an older camp and finding something that might be potentially economic. I mean, some of the results they put out recently are pretty good. So.
Right, because like we said, they're in old accreted volcanic terrains that have been sutured together, and gold, was generated from above, from metamorphism below, went up through these structures, deposit all this gold. Now, the volcanic, like that environment produced a lot of magmas.
Yeah.
Right? So you have this porphyry thing kind of coming up. You're like, oh, well, there's a perspective for porphyry deposits. But of course, it's porphyry Archean, which we've spoken about before, and they're not so common, and they're very, really ambiguous to put your finger on because they're so old and they've been reworked and remetamorphosed, and don't really know if it's still a porphyry anymore. But that's what Osisko is looking at. They're like, this could be porphyry.
Which is why they're drilling like hundreds hundreds of kilometers worth of meterage.
Yeah.
Like the biggest drill programs. Like,
well, you look at Barkerville they've got like 100,000 meters this year.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Chris Loader yesterday. He's like, yeah, well, with these ore deposits, he says, when you're dealing with gold, it's going to cost you, I don't know, 25 million to get 1 million ounce and to indicate it.
wow. That's
the Osisko.
yeah. Pound the ground. Well, to be fair, one thing you should be noting, like in Quebec, with how super flow through works, and the infrastructure, it's significantly cheaper per meter, right?
That's
but
true.
On average, not all projects are the same, obviously.
Yeah, everything's going to be different.
Yeah, but on average, it's per meter a lot cheaper. So when you talk about some of these new ideas and districts, and you were sort of looking at all of Canada, I know you've spoken a little bit about how excited you were about some things you found out in the Yukon versus the Barkerville camps.
Yes.
Also a little bit about
those platformal sequences.
Yeah,
got my eye on every single one.
The emerging stuff going on in the north in terms of Nunavut and the Northwest Territories.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
Is there anything else sort of exciting that might be frontier sort of, or you can just talk a little bit more about those opportunities maybe as far as new discoveries going on in Canada right now, what you find exciting?
Well, okay, just not exciting as in I gotta go explore for more, but I just think it's really interesting. Okay, so the Thompson Nickel Belt?
Yeah.
Okay, so super crazy belt. That belt is occurring actually along the edge of a craton called the Superior. Okay, on the western edge, right, of Superior. And that was formed at around about 1 billion years ago when all the cratons in Canada kind of came together to form like basically the core of North America.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of like that edge rifted open and all these like nickel rich, copper rich dikes and sills kind of plumped up through. And so you get this like really big, awesome belt, Thompson Nickel Belt. And that extends, of course, into northern Quebec. And interestingly enough, potentially into Nunavut and Baffin Island, which is a new thing.
Yeah.
Right? Brand new people. So keep your eye on that space.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is that on the eastern side, the eastern margin of the Superior Craton, we have Sudbury.
Yeah.
But so as these dikes are coming up through Thompson Nickel Belt 1 billion years ago, around pretty much the same time, a giant asteroid came down and landed like right in the middle of that margin again. So maybe there was already pre-existing. It
just got mixed up all
it just
over. Yeah.
And then it just got remixed and redone. But I thought that was neat, and I was like, I really need to explore that edge of these cratons more, because maybe every single edge of the cratons in North America or in Canada have that little space where you can find a nickel copper rich sort of belt, because you have these like crustal chunks, and then they've got basins surrounding it with sediments, and then they rift open, that upwells lots of magma. So it's a good environment. So anywhere maybe along the edges of these things you could get magmatic nickel copper deposits. I don't know, but I thought it was really cool.
It's a nice thesis. Thesis. It sounds like another PhD paper. And the other thing, I guess,
plus asteroids are cool.
Yeah, interstellar events. I like that. And the other thing Craig mentioned last week from the MDRU was that now a lot of people are having to do exploration undercover a lot, right? So there's new, and the question I always wondered is people always talk about another copper discovery in Canada anywhere, and it's like you have Orico obviously doing work on Comess, but a lot of that stuff's quite deep. Same with, if you look at Seabridge, it's very deep. I'm just wondering maybe if all the near surface copper has been found. That's
well, you look at Colorado's KSB property.
Yeah.
And they've got this massive alteration footprint, and it's stellar. They've got everything on that property, from gold, porphyry copper, you name it. But they really haven't dug into the big porphyry copper yet. They haven't drilled that.
Well, it takes a lot of money.
It takes a lot of money, but they haven't really found it. But everything, this is the best looking property in BC, I think, when it comes to porphyry copper.
Well, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, because people talk about, and that's one of the things I just did. We were talking off stage here, or out of studio, about how I was doing that data article on financing.
Yeah.
And people talk a lot about how there's been a serious underinvestment in copper exploration. So it'll be interesting to see what we need from the market for somebody to step up and fund exploration on something like what Colorado has.
Man, just after what Kakula is pumping out.
Yeah,
I don't think the world needs another copper deposit after that.
Yeah, well, it is in the
which is crazy.
An interesting area. But yeah, I just saw
crazy.
the new result from the Kakula stuff. That thing just appears to go on forever. So it's that's definitely
it goes into the setting sun.
Yeah,
it just
it's
and
a
takes
monster.
the world with it. It's huge.
Yeah.
So
well, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I mean, Ivanhoe's fairly. I didn't look at the share price today, but fairly been on a run here. And it'll be interesting to see if anybody's interested in JVing that or maybe taking it out. I mean, there's just not a lot of money out there.
There's a lot of insecurity, I think, too, in the market with, kind of that sort of investment. Like, look what's going on in Indonesia with Freeport right now.
The Grasberg stuff, yeah.
It's kind of scary when all of a sudden a country can turn and be like...
Well, that's why I asked, like, maybe a major, in order to forego that socio-political risk, would want to JV something like what Colorado has in BC.
Yeah.
Not to say that there's not inherent or rising socio-political risk in BC, because depending on who you ask, sometimes Africa might be better. But I mean, it's all
stay home.
Yeah, you stay home.
Canada, we've got some really great deposits. Like we've got some amazing SEDEX deposits, some of the world class SEDEX deposits, world class MVTs.
Yeah.
And like, so base metals, we've got that, and obviously we got gold. We got so much gold. So it just seems to be like a lot more areas where you can move, but you have to be clever. And that's the thing, in the DRC, like I said, you just throw a rock, and wherever it lands, it's going to land on a world-class deposit. You don't need to, you need to be clever, clearly, but it's the opportunity is there, it's boundless. Whereas here in Canada, these rocks are old, they've been reworked.
Yeah.
So they've been moved around. So you got to know what you're looking for. So geologists, we can't get complacent when we're exploring for deposits here, because the rewards can be huge.
And plus, a lot of the camps in Canada have been fairly well drilled, especially in Ontario and Quebec, right? Because my dad always laughs that when he was my age, they were drilling all around Kirkland Lake and through Timmins, and they were the first people to drill out there. It was all greenfield, right, in the mid-70s through the early 80s, and then they found all the...
To be honest, though, I've been on a gold deposit where, we were in a gold deposit, and we drilled a hole, and we hit absolutely nothing. Yeah. And it was right in the heart of this freaking thing, and I was like... Why didn't we hit it? We actually hit a dike going down through, but it was really minuscule. And it was, if that had been your hole, you could have just missed the whole game.
Oh, and the market really is not particularly forgiving.
No.
Now
that's
especially.
That's kind of the thing. So when I say it's been drilled before, I'm like, well, has it? You always got to kind of look at it with a little bit of a conniving eye and be like, maybe not.
Yeah, especially That's why you always pound on the structural.
Yeah, you gotta know your structure. Well, in that perfect case, that example, if we were drilling and it went to this massive shear zone, and it just got real bad, and I was like, oh, this is not good, because nothing is going to survive this shear zone, right? And then suddenly it just went into this boring dike, and then it went out, and I'm like, yeah, guys, we missed it. We just hit a dike. Everything's just been cut off right there. That's it. Yeah. But if you step out, then it's there, and sure enough, it was.
Awesome.
So it just goes to show, you gotta know what you're looking at. But
and mistakes will be made.
Mistakes are that's how you learn. I love mistakes. Mistakes are the best.
Yeah, that's how we all learn, I think.
But anyway, so I guess this has been a really casual, just chill out, let's have a gab.
Yeah, and
about
Lesley's
everything.
Finishing up her. Well, it's good you finished up your whole Canada.
Yeah, I gotta do figures
journey.
now, though.
So everybody do look out for that. We'll figure out. I'll have it next week. I'll have a date for when this is all going to be coming out. I'll ask John when I get off air here. But
it's so amazing.
Yeah, do look forward to that. It's going to be an awesome magazine. I'm sure it'll look really, really slick.
Colorful.
Because Lesley loves
the maps.
And
it'll be very
Craig
colorful.
said, get out your pencil crayons. So this has been the Geology Corner. Once again, hop by the website. Do like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and check us out on YouTube. And look forward to the Canadian Mining Symposium May 9th in London. Check that out. It's going to be awesome.
Yes.
And welcome back to studio. So yeah, it's always great to touch base with Lesley because she's doing some awesome work, sort of tying all that disparate information. I don't say disparate, but the geological information in Canada is sort of, each province has its own geological survey. It can be a little bit all over the place. So for Lesley to go out, compile it, put it all together, and tell a story is really cool. So if you want to check out her individual regional geology articles, they're actually on our website now. So you can surf over to northernminer.com, and all Lesley's work up to date, I believe, is up there. She sort of started on the East Coast, I think, moved west, and then finished off with Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, I believe. So surf over to the website. You can check out all her stuff. Probably just hit the search box and type in the jurisdiction you're interested in, and a nice geology piece by Lesley will come up, sort of giving you the general layout, so sort of the geology 101, if you will, but also some really cool observations from her end. So it was great to be able for her to sort of sit down and summarize all the work she's been doing over the past few months. And now we have an exclusive interview that I did with Trevali Mining President and CEO, Dr. Mark Cruz. And as mentioned, they had it was about 2 weeks ago, I believe, they had a really big deal with Glencore, wherein they paid about $400 million in cash and shares for an 80% stake in the Rosh Pinah mine in Namibia and a 90% interest in the Percoa mine in Burkina Faso. Now, if you want to break that consideration down, which is good because it's material, Glencore will receive $244 million US in cash, plus 175 million shares of Trevali priced at $1.20 each. That will result in Glencore holding a 25% equity interest in Trevali. So that's the material part. Is they're essentially increasing that partnership, and it's really interesting. We'll get into it with Dr. Cruz. He's going to be on. I'll run a few comments from him momentarily, but about how that relationship sort of evolved with Glencore, and that started with the Santander mine in Peru, as we mentioned, where Glencore actually supplied the mill and some of the infrastructure for Trevali under a lease to own agreement, and then also sort of expanded because they also have an offtake agreement, as we mentioned at the onset, at the company's Caribou mine outside of Bathurst. So just sort of an emerging story here, and the interesting thing is the acquisitions, when you combine with what Trevali currently has in their production stable, will create a company that is forecast to produce 235,000 tons of contained zinc in 2018, and that equates to roughly 1.6% of global production. So this is a really emerging story, a Canadian story, which I really like. I'd also like to give a shout out, the Vice President of Investor Relations and Corporate Communications at Trevali, Steve Stacku, is a Northern Miner alum, so he used to actually have my job. So I just want to shout out to Steve. Thanks for setting up the interview and everything. It's always great to talk to people who came from the Northern Miner family and have since sort of stepped out into the business. So it was awesome to talk to Steve as well. But yeah, I'm going to run a few comments from Mark. But first, I just wanted to break down a couple other things. In order to fund the transaction, Trevali intends to raise $230 million via a bought deal financing priced at $1.20 per subscription receipt. The main book runner is going to be BMO Capital Markets, is taking 40% of the financing, while Scotiabank will take another 30% as co-lead. Trevali will also refinance its debt load with a US $190 million senior secured credit facility that has a 5-year term and carries a 3.5% plus LIBOR interest rate. And that's good because I think that significantly decreases their cost of capital. They were operating under a higher interest rate previously. So as an upside to this deal, they have restructured their debt, which does look a little bit better on the balance sheet. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to run the comments from Dr. Mark Cruz, President and CEO of Trevali, and I will see you after the break just to wrap up the show.
No, absolutely. Really, Trevali, we started working with Glencore in really 2009, but probably more so in 2010, when we kind of formed a business relationship to build our Santander mine. At that point, obviously Glencore had a mill out of feed, we had a growing resource base, and both sides put two and two together and got four. And really, the intervening period between then and kind of more recently, we have been working very closely together. Certainly, both sides operate in a similar manner. Most of us here at Trevali are ex-major mining company as well, so we kind of do speak the same language, which definitely helps, or perhaps is a little bit different than most junior companies, I would argue. And I suppose the markets have been a bit of a roller coaster. So certainly, there's been some, hard times together, and you really know who your partner is when the chips are down. And I think the one thing that both sides liked was that, during the tough market conditions, in the last couple of years, we just all worked together. There was no kind of recriminations or finger pointing. It was, okay, we've got a job to do. Let's get it done and move ahead. So, certainly, dial it out to 2015 or a little bit after when Glencore acquired Xstrata. Certainly I'd seen it before that, when you're forming a super major, things that used to make sense from a size perspective kind of don't anymore, and just because there's only so much management time in the day. So certainly at that point, obviously congratulated Glencore on their, the takeover, and I just had the initial discussion that, at some point it may make sense. There may be assets there that no longer are an ideal fit, given that, it's a new company at that point in time. And really, ultimately, that's what culminated in us starting due diligence on some of the assets. Really, we've been actively looking at these since 2015, so it has been quite a prolonged due diligence period. Now, some of that was market related. Obviously, 2015 was tough for the industry. And then Trevali was focusing on getting its second mine, Caribou, up and running, which obviously had to be management's main focus. And really the last kind of piece, or the missing piece, was when we declared commercial production at Caribou in July of last summer. That's when we kind of reactivated the file, so to speak, and both sides got really a lot more serious about the due diligence process, which obviously culminated in the announcement 2 weeks ago now, I guess, or whenever it was, very recently, about the acquisition of both the African mines. Kind of had a little bit of kind of exposure via osmosis to Africa, coming from the Anglo-American stable. So that was kind of the home territory, so to speak. So, reasonably comfort there. A lot of colleagues who still work in Africa are active there. Specifically looking at Namibia, very highly ranked. It's effectively like the Switzerland of Africa. Very stable jurisdiction. Since independence, has had numerous, democratic presidents elected, and never any issues with it. Obviously, Roche Pinat has been operating without interruption since 1969, which again, leads to some comfort that you are actively able to mine in the country through various political upheavals and independence and what have you, and it always produced with no disruptions or no material disruptions right the way through its long history. So, really that was relatively easy. Obviously, Burkina, a bit more of an emerging mining jurisdiction, very well known for gold, probably in the last decade. Percoa is the only zinc mine in West Africa, so it is a little bit of an anomaly. But certainly, a lot of the kind of gold mid-tiers, I guess, for want of a better word, have been very active in Burkina. Permits are coming through. People are buying mines, selling mines, and are active there as well. So, certainly, comfort level is reasonably high. It is a little bit of a higher risk than obviously Canadian operations or Peru, but both well-known mining jurisdictions, and certainly they've been working efficiently for, many years in Namibia's case, and certainly over the last decade in Burkina's. Certainly before we acquired these two assets, we've actually screened over 500 zinc assets globally. The top two that came out were the two we acquired. That's obviously our filters, our perspective. It varies depending on company. But what is difficult out there at this point in time is to acquire producing zinc assets, or certainly ones that can impact the forthcoming zinc cycle. So certainly Trevali's perspective, if it's a cycle or two out, we don't care. Because in the end of the day, we should have the cash flow, we should have the strength that we can pick up those assets at the bottom of the cycle. So we're quite happy to let other groups focus on those ones, and obviously the best of luck to them. But it is hard to acquire producing assets now. I think personally, when the annual TC negotiations are out, they're obviously a bit prolonged this year. They're probably going to be out in the next 2 to 4 weeks. What we're hearing is material discounts in favor of the miners. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the next re-rating of zinc. And what we do know is when zinc breaks free, it tends to go suborbital. I mean, it runs very hard. So certainly that's why we're keen to acquire these assets when we did. I personally think the window's shrinking very rapidly. So I think a lot of groups out there probably missed the window because, once zinc takes off, everything's obviously going to cost more. So, you don't really want to be acquiring things at top of cycle, or generally that's not a great idea. But nonetheless, other companies will make their own decisions in that regard.
Welcome back, and thanks again to the team at Trevali Mining and President and CEO Dr. Mark Cruz for taking the time to sit down and have a frankly very interesting conversation on zinc. We have been talking about it quite a bit recently. We've discussed the relative run-up in zinc prices and where they might go. We've talked about some of the supply concerns as some of the major mines like Scorpion shut down, and what that might mean for anyone in the zinc business, from exploration right up to companies like Trevali that have production. And interestingly enough, I've heard, and you heard Dr. Cruz mention it at the end there. But this is a sentiment I've heard not just from companies like Trevali, but also other zinc producers, larger zinc producers, for example, Tech Resources, that there's sort of this sentiment out there that this window on run-up in zinc prices is not going to be that prolonged. And in order to really benefit from it, you need near-term or in-production stage assets. So it's interesting because you might not see this huge inflow in exploration dollars into zinc necessarily. You probably will. But as Dr. Cruz mentioned, Jared, during the end of his interview, that might be 1 or 2 cycles out, 2 or 3 cycles out. So it's interesting to see that, and it's sort of a sentiment, as mentioned, that I've heard more often recently, is that, okay, yes, there's going to be sort of a bull scenario in zinc, but only certain companies with production likely or near-term production are going to benefit over this cycle, though as he noted, I like the word suborbital, quote-unquote, that Dr. Cruz used to describe the run-up in zinc prices. We all remember that from about a decade ago in 2006, 2007, when we briefly saw that $2 level per pound zinc. So interesting stuff, and again, thanks to Trevali for taking the opportunity to give us that exclusive. We do like the story here is sort of an emerging, almost intermediate zinc player. As mentioned, they'll be the 8th largest producer of the industrial metal globally. So a nice Canadian story there. And once again, thanks to them for taking the time. So that pretty much wraps up our show for the week. Just a few housekeeping items. As usual, please do like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check out our YouTube, and like this podcast, or rate it, I should say, on iTunes. And once again, we mention this once a week, but I'm really excited about it. This is the Canadian Mining Symposium. It is our event in London on May 9th. We've got a really good stable of speakers. I believe we just added Rob McEwen from McEwen Mining to a list of speakers that includes Lucas Lundin, Robert Freeland, David Garofalo from Goldcorp, and Kelvin Jasinski from Barrick. We also have a great list of earlier stage exploration and development companies coming along who will be making presentations as well. If you're interested in the list of who's attending the Canadian Mining Symposium, please do hop over to the website. We have a full list there. You can check out details on the event. Should be really exciting. I will probably be there. We're working on it. We're hoping to do a live podcast from the event as well as some video, so it's going to be really cool. So check that out on our website. And yeah, this has been Matthew Keevil, and this has been the Northern Miner Podcast. Thanks again for your listenership, and we'll talk to you next week.